It's your Locked On Flyers podcast for Wednesday, August 3rd. Your daily dose of Flyers news, analysis, and high quality content that is excited to talk New York Islanders today on the show in a tour of the Metro.
And thanks to Brazil for making us the number one Flyers podcast.
Yes, thank you to our Brazilian listeners. Let's get the show going.
You're Locked On Flyers, your daily podcast on the Philadelphia Flyers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, I am Rachel Donner. You can find me on Twitter at rmiriam. I'm here with the brilliant Russ Cohen, who's on Twitter at Sportsology. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. You can follow us on Twitter at Locked On Flyers. You'll keep up to date on all of our episodes and Flyers news. You can also email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. On today's show, we've got some World Juniors news to talk about. Then we're going to get straight into a conversation with Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. We talked all about what the Isles have been up to this offseason and pretty interesting stuff. So excited to bring that conversation to you. Locked On Flyers is free and available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you are listening right now. So subscribe. You'll get all of our episodes here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Russ, it is weird to say this in August, but World Juniors are around the corner.
I know. My body clock is so off on this. I mean, I'm watching Holenka, which is great because that hasn't been around in a little while. So that's good. But yeah, the World Juniors in August.
I don't know. Yeah, it used to be around the holidays, you're bundled up, get some extra hockey in. Nope, it is the dog days of summer. World Juniors start next Tuesday, but we have two Flyers prospects on Team Canada in Elliot Denoyer and Tyson Forster.
Yeah, Forster will be a big piece for this team because of his size and his shot. They'll use him a lot. Denoyer has a chance to have a good impact, but I think Forster is probably going to see more ice time because of the total package. Denoyer, if he starts scoring a lot, I think could change that narrative.
Yeah, I'll be very interested to see what the usage is of each of them, what situations, especially for Denoyer. Are they going to give him more favorable kinds of situations? But with Tyson Forster, I think they can put him out in more like two-way situations, like you were saying. So I do think it'll be good to see both of them out there. Team USA is doing something a little different with their team for this tournament versus the 2023 tournament. So Cutter Gauthier is not participating in this one, but it seems like he's part of the group that'll at least be the core going into next year's tournament.
Yeah, and that's a big deal. I didn't expect Cutter to be in the upcoming one because I felt like he was going to try and practice to be a center in camp for Boston College and concentrate on that, and then mid-season can do that. Just to show you how screwed up I am too, I just double checked it. So the Holenka was canceled in 2020, but it was around in 2021. Like, I'm telling you, it's going to take a lot to sort all this out in my mind, like in 5 years. Like, wait, which one was canceled? Wait, they had that one. They didn't have this one. This one started, then it was canceled, then it was postponed, then they decided to have it the following August. Like, all this is just crazy to me.
Yeah, I think it'll take a lot of work to untangle how all these tournaments played out when our memory starts to fade a little bit. All right, we are going to get straight into our conversation with Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. We talked all about what the Isles did this offseason with the draft and the lack of free agent signings and so much more. So we will get to that right now. All right, we are thrilled to welcome to the show my Friday co-host on the Locked On NHL National Show and host of Locked On Islanders, Gil Martin.
How you doing?
Doing real good. All right, so wanted to get into what the Islanders have been up to this off season, and I think the biggest maybe surprise to some was the firing of Barry Trotz and then the hiring of Lane Lambert. And I think that hire was most interesting from outside observers because Lou Lamoriello had specifically said they wanted a new outside perspective, and he is not that. So, what is your take on that hire?
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like when you hire Lane Lambert, who has been Barry Trotz's assistant for so long. I mean, he was with him in Washington. He's been following and working with Barry Trotz for so long. It's like you have Barry Trotz without Barry Trotz, the system, the philosophy, the way of doing things. Now, look, everybody does things slightly differently when they become the head man as opposed to when you're the assistant. But yeah, it seems to me like this move, it's like the more things change, the more things stay the same. And it doesn't make a lot of sense on the surface unless the fact that Barry Trotz said he really wanted to take this year off ends up being true. And whether it was with the Islanders or with someone else, he just needed a little break from coaching.
Yeah, what's interesting about all that was nobody thought that Trotz was gonna just hang out this offseason. Everybody kind of thought he was going to get a job, but he definitely priced himself out. He thought for some reason he should be the highest paid coach, and everybody's like, "Hey, we like you, Barry Trotz, but highest paid? I don't know." The interesting thing is, and this is where I think Lambert is going to run into some trouble. I mean, the team was built like with the appreciation of Lou, but for Barry Trotz. Right. And so now you've got some aging tough guys, a lot of $5 million forwards who haven't produced, not all of them, but some of them haven't produced. And it's a tough job to take over because I don't believe the Lou rhetoric that without any changes, this was just a bad year, just a lot of road games. No, this team has problems.
It does. And, part of it is it's just very hard to win a lot of games 3-2 and 2-1. There's no margin for error when you're trying to win hockey games that way. And, the problem is that the Islanders last year were 22nd in the league in goals scored. And the year before, when they went to the conference final, they weren't significantly better than that. I think they were 20th. If you're going to play hockey that way, you need to be almost perfect all the time. And it's a very hard standard to play to. This team is flawed. They need more goal scoring. And if they don't get it, like I said, you need to be so efficient defensively, can't turn the puck over, can't make mistakes, need your goalie to step up really large. They did it for 2 years. It's very hard to maintain that standard.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, the Matt Barzal issue is such that they're going to have to activate him this year so they can get closer to the 80-point Matt Barzal and not the guy that was there last year that Trotz seemingly didn't care as long as he played his system. That could help him a little bit, but I guess the notion everybody feels like Lou has all these deals done and it's just a matter of time. Listen, I don't think he's got any favors around the league that are going to be called in anymore. I think when everybody's cap is the way it is and you're calling to say, take Josh Bailey and, so I can get a scorer, teams don't want to do that.
Yeah, it's a tough sell. And, there are all kinds of rumors. Oh, yeah, maybe the Islanders have a deal with Nazem Kadri and I'll believe it when I see it. And if they're going to sign Kadri, someone else has to be shipped out.
Right.
And if I'm Nazem Kadri, there's only so long I'm willing to wait until I'm going to put pen to paper. So the longer this goes on, the more doubts I have about the secret deal situation.
Right. So given all that, how hot do you think Lou Lamoriello's seat is right now?
I don't think it's that hot. I think it is probably more likely that Lou Lamoriello retires than gets fired. This is the last year of his contract. He's in the Hall of Fame for a reason. I think even if the team stumbles a little bit, I don't see management rushing to fire Lou. But I could see Lou saying, you know what? I don't see where this is going right now. We don't have a lot of cap space. We don't have a lot of prospects. My contract ends at the end of this season. I'm 80 years old. I'm going to step down. I think that's a more realistic possibility.
Yeah, I think that's always a possibility. But, the tough part of that is, like, the Islanders got some breaks. They got a break with the bubble because I feel like if there was more season or more runway there, they might not have made it. The year after, yeah, they were a great team and they were going to do things. No question about it. But the deals that they were making, I just can't believe Lou would look at that and feel like that the window would stay open for a while, especially while you're piling on the Matt Martins. And I get it. Look, he's a great guy. They love him there. He does charity on the island. I get all that. But as far as usefulness compared to salary, it's not great. When Ross Johnston gets tons of ice time over young players there, like Kiefer Bellows, there's something wrong. And I don't know if that's going to continue. I would hope that doesn't continue because you lost like a year of development on Bellows. BetOnline.net's your number one source for all your betting needs and sports info. Find league reviews and news on every league, including Major League Baseball and all the info leading up to next year's NFL, NBA, and NHL seasons. They even cover combat sports, esports, and golf too. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, from live betting to scores and podcasts and more. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events. Head to the BetOnline website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts.
We are going to wrap up with Gil Martin from Locked On Isles coming up next.
Yeah, a lot of the time, some of these moves don't make sense. And, you talk about in the salary cap era, you need value. You need to spend your money wisely. And the Islanders typically have overpaid their bottom six forwards, and they don't have enough room to get legitimate top six forwards. So it's almost like this team has 3 third lines and a fourth line as far as their forwards are concerned. And again, that's why you're trying to win 2-1, because you can't win 6-4 on a regular basis. And, since Barry Trotz and Lou Lamoriello came in, you saw the numbers on Matt Barzal. His Calder Trophy winning year, he was 80-something points, more than a point per game. He's never come close to that since the Trotz-Lamoriello duo came in. Now, the team has won more, but statistically, if you're trying to attract free agents, if you're trying to keep Matthew Barzal, whose contract ends at the end of this season, telling him you're only going to score 55, 60 points as opposed to 85, not exactly the way to get that done.
Yeah, I think that is a real problem that the Islanders are running into right now. And, you talk about not really having the personnel to improve things, not having the cap space. Your prospect pool is a little light as well, especially with the Islanders not having a first round pick for 3 consecutive years. That is a really rough way to build a successful franchise, and not many teams are able to do it because drafting and developing is how most Stanley Cup champions, get their key players. So how has that been? And what is the criticism of that been like?
To me right now, the criticism is this team has all their eggs in one basket. This window that we've talked about, and it's closing. I'd say there's maybe a year or 2 left in this window. There's nobody waiting to come in and give this team the boost that it needs. When you don't have a first round pick for 3 years, you're in win now mode, and they don't have the horses offensively to guarantee that they're going to win now. So, Lou has talked about that hockey move, but the cap is a problem. When you're paying Josh Bailey $5 million a year, Kyle Palmieri, $5 million a year. You could afford 1 or 2 contracts for guys who are not producing up to their cap space. But when you start adding up, Beauvillier is making 4+. Pajot is overpaid for a third line center. He's a very good third line center, but you could have one of those contracts, but when you have 4 or 5 of them, it really prevents you from being able to sign people who can really produce 25, 30, 35 goals a year. They don't have them.
So another, I'm going to say mismanaged thing. I know everybody wants to praise Barry Trotz, and that's fine. He is a great coach. But another mismanaged asset is Ryan Pulock, because he's got one of the best shots in the league, and yet in the last 2 years, his shot totals are way down, like 40, 50 less shots a year. What that translates into is, instead of getting double-digit goals, you're getting 5 goals like you did out of them, and fewer assists. The more he shoots, the more chance he has of scoring, or at least creating havoc in front of the net where somebody else could score, like Anders Lee or anybody else. And and look, I think Noah Dobson will be one of the best young defensemen in hockey. Like, I had him higher ranked than most in his draft year for that reason. But it still doesn't mean Pulock shouldn't be the power play specialist that he is. And I don't feel like they're using him that way.
No, they're not. I mean, it's a defense first system. It's a defense first mentality. And, Pulock and Pulock, their job is to shut down primarily the other team, but you sacrifice offense, and they sacrifice a lot of offense on this team. And if you're not perfect, that hurts you.
Yeah, I think that's a huge issue. And you talked about those close, 2-1, 3-2 kind of games. And you're right that is going to be a huge factor, I think, for the Islanders going into next season, and where some other teams are going to be able to steal points from the Islanders, or at least, manage to get that tie and force overtime, just because the Islanders aren't the team that's getting that insurance goal in the regular run of play. But I do want to talk a little bit more about the Islanders prospects and draft, because even though you didn't have those first round picks in the 2021 draft, Atu Rati dropped to the second round, was a pretty heavily touted prospect. So how is his development going, and what is his path to the NHL?
I think he's been a pleasant surprise. He came to North America at the very end of the AHL season. I think he played 2 regular season games, and then the Bridgeport Islanders made it to the second round of the playoffs for the first time since the Civil War. And yeah, he was he scored a game-winning overtime goal during that run, and he looked pretty good. Nice to get his feet wet in North America. He's probably 1 year away right now. Give him a full year at at Bridgeport, and see what he can do. And then, if someone gets hurt and he's doing well, maybe he gets a few games with the New York Islanders. But I anticipate he's 1 year away, and he's looked pretty good. He had a rough year the year before he was drafted, and that's what caused his stock to go down. But before he struggled that year, people were talking about him as a bona fide first half of the first round kind of a pick. And he looked more like that as the season wore on than he did the way he looked the year before.
Yeah, I think they just overly picked on him. I had him still highly ranked. I do a lot of draft work, and then he did he played in the summer games and did really well, and showed that just what he normally would do for that. And so that was like, all right, you know what? You could see that he's going to be okay. The only thing with him is sometimes he's not playing a full 60 every shift, every moment, but maybe that'll get better as he gets older. The other guy I want to talk about, though, is Robin Salo, who I think is developed. I think he's developed to the point where, he does everything okay. Like, he's a decent skater. He's got a little bit of offense. He's a good defender. He's going to be probably a bottom pairing guy. He should get more opportunity this year. What do you think is going to happen with him? Because at 23, sometimes they do get better defensemen until they're 25. But for him, I think there's just minimal upside at this point. But I think he could play.
I think he could play too. the Islanders organization, and I don't know how much of this is Lou Lamoriello, how much of it was Barry Trotz, and whether Lane Lambert is going to feel any differently, but they bring their guys along, their prospects, very slowly. They're slow to trust younger players. We've seen that with Oliver Wahlstrom, with Kiefer Bellows, and with Robin Salo. Salo's play when he doesn't have the puck has been more of an issue. They're confident that he can do things with the puck, but when he doesn't have the puck, and the fact that he's a smaller guy limits him defensively at times. I could see him sort of being what Noah Dobson was 2 years ago, where he'll be the sixth guy, but he's only going to get 14, 15, 16 minutes a game, and they're not going to trust him in big situations. They'll put him on the second power play unit. They'll play him early in a game. If he struggles, his ice time will be curtailed. He'll be that third pairing guy, but he's sort of at that point in his career where if he doesn't get more ice time and establish himself, he's going to be that quadruple A player who's too good for the AHL, but never really establishes himself in the NHL.
Yeah, the one thing I could add, I think for the most part, they do the right thing with their prospects, except for like what I said with Bellows last year. Wahlstrom was horrific defensively. He never had to play defense with the program. And so I think they did the right thing with him, because if you'd have just brought him up and he's just turns into a 20-goal scorer and never does anything else, he was never going to get any better. Where now I think the upside's better. I
hope that proves to be true. And it was tough love. There's no question that, they weren't picking on the guy. He had his shortcomings and he wasn't addressing them. And it was frustrating because here is a team struggling for goal scoring. A guy gets off to such a good start. I mean, I think he had like 9 goals by by early December. And then he finishes with 12 or 13 because he just couldn't stay on the ice. He wasn't listening to the coaching staff. So, Wahlstrom was frustrating last year, and this year is sort of a crossroads for him. He's either going to get with the program and be a big part of this team, or he's going to tread water and maybe be trade bait before too long.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm very curious what the Islanders trade deadline is going to look like next season, just because I think they're going to have to clear some cap space to start preparing for the next off season, and who is going to be the guys that they're going to try and ship out, right?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is going to depend on how the team is doing. If they're competing for a playoff spot, the philosophy will be more to try to get in and make that playoff run. I mean, the good thing about the defense first system is, unlike a lot of other teams, the Islanders don't have to change the way they play when the playoffs start. They play playoff style hockey pretty much all year. And we saw on those 2 runs to the conference final in 2020 and 2021 that, their style fits in really well with the playoffs. But if they're struggling,
you just have to get there.
Yeah, but you have to get there. And the thing is that people sometimes overlook, even Islander fans, both 2020 and 2021, they barely got in. They, as you mentioned, Russ, they made it in 2020 because they expanded the pool and they were slumping right before.
Oh yeah, they were limping in, man.
Everything out, and in in 2021 they were a wild card team essentially. So they didn't make it in convincingly, but once they got in, they were very successful playing that defense first kind of style. If this team is struggling to make the playoffs or is out of playoff contention when we get close to the trade deadline, they have got to start selling off some of those mid-line overpaid guys. And that won't be easy, but they've got to start rebuilding because, like I said, the window for this team is maybe another couple of years at max.
Well, one more thing in that direction. So, if they are selling assets at the deadline, who knows, they may or may not be. If Lou's not talking to Matt Barzal now, you could have a Johnny Gaudreau situation before you know it. And the Islanders, because of their prospect pool and because of the lack of first rounders, they can't afford to let Barzal walk for nothing. And that's where I think ownership has to sort of keep an eye on Lou and really kind of, manage what's going on. If you remember, similar things were happening with Ilya Kovalchuk, and then management prodded Lou to get the deal done, and he did. And then, of course, he circumvented the cap and had that issue. But he did get the deal done. I kind of wonder if Ledecky's going to have to do the same thing here, because to me, it doesn't matter if Matt Barzal only scored like 50-something points last year. I know what he can be in this league, and I've got to pay him more than that. It's not always about production. Sometimes you have to look at the big picture, and that's the thing where Lou is going to have to be forthright about that. Otherwise, you could lose your best player, your most talented player.
And I'll take it a step further. After what happened with John Tavares, from a PR standpoint, they can't afford to lose Matthew Barzal for nothing. That would be, I mean, there's already, the fans are upset. We can't sign any big ticket free agents. You know, we didn't get Goudreau. We didn't, you know, we can't get guys to come here. If they lose Barzal for nothing, or, you know, if they have to trade him, they better get a nice package for him, because the reputation of this organization, you know, would take a big hit if it happened again.
So where do you think the Islanders fit into the Metropolitan Division now in terms of competing for a playoff spot, or like in the standings? Do you have a prediction for where they'll end up?
You know, as of right now, I'd say they're probably 5th or 6th in the division. If they get that goal scorer, they can move up to 3rd or 4th. But the division is getting better. I mean, Carolina's still an elite team. The Rangers, as long as they have the goaltending they have, they're going to be competitive. Columbus definitely got better. Pittsburgh held on to Malkin and Letang. Washington still has Ovechkin. I mean, they're getting older. They're not quite the team they were a few years back, but they're dangerous. It's not going to be so easy for the Islanders. It's going to be a fight. And the Devils are getting better, too. I should mention that. They have a lot of young talent on that team. They may be a year or two away from real playoff contention, but they're moving in the right direction. So
one team missing from that list. I wonder who they are.
No, they should be missing. You know, the thing about Ilya Sorokin is, though, he has the ability to be a Vezina candidate soon. And so if he does manage to do that, he could keep them around the area of like Pittsburgh and Washington and that last spot, you know, or with one of the last spots for their Atlantic team trying to get in the wild card. That's probably their best hope.
Yep, I agree. I think that's spot on. And, you know, everyone talks about Shesterkin, but Sorokin and Shesterkin, that's going to be a heck of a rivalry and heck of a matchup. And, you know, watching great Russian goalies, you know, in the New York area, it's going to be a thing for a while, I think.
Yeah, and they were World Junior teammates, so like they're very familiar with each other. They, you know, it's funny. Sorokin became the big star when Shesterkin left. Like that's when all of a sudden you know, so it's like it is a good rivalry that's really not quite there yet, but it will be.
It will be, and it would be great for New York area hockey if those two have like a 5 to 10 year run where they're just big rivals and the two teams. You know, the Rangers and the Islanders haven't met in the playoffs since 1994. It's time, you know.
Gil, thank you so much for joining us. This was fantastic. We get to talk about lots of things on the national show, but not often specifically just the Islanders. So it's always a pleasure to get to do that here.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. Always a pleasure.
All right. Thanks once again to Gil Martin from Locked On Islanders. Always fun talking to Gil. He's my co-host on the Friday show for Locked On NHL, like I said. So check us out together every week on that one. All right. Wrapping up with our Flyers fun thing. The Flyers and Islanders have some interesting trade history between them. And Russ, you brought up a real good one.
I did. Yeah, there was in 1973, the Flyers acquired 29-year-old veteran checking center Terry Crisp from the New York Islanders exchange for Jean Potvin and Glenn Irwin. Jean Potvin, who is no longer with us, was the brother of Dennis and was on some of those Islanders championship teams. Terry Crisp, good player, got into the broadcasting world and actually really came full circle last March. I actually tweeted out because I had just spoken to Pete Weber and Terry, who made the road trip to basically announced that he was retiring from the Preds broadcast, but he wanted to do it in Philly because of his Philly roots. So it was, it's come all around.
It really has, and of course, Terry Crisp was a huge part of the teams that won the Stanley Cups for the Flyers. So I think
Yes.
a good trade for both
Both. Yeah,
teams.
it really worked out for both. And, uh, they were both good players. And yeah, I mean, Jean doesn't get remembered as much because his brother was Dennis, but hey, what are you going to do?
Exactly. All right, that'll do it for today's show. We'll be back again on Friday. We'll talk about a prospect. We'll hit the mailbag. So send in your questions via Twitter at Locked On Flyers, or you can email us at lockedonflyers@gmail.com. I'm Rachel. I'm on Twitter at rmiriam. That's RMIRIAM.
I'm Russ. I'm at Sportsology, SPORTSOLOGY.
You made us your first listen today. Now make your next listen Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world with Locked On NHL, your daily NHL podcast. Have a great day, everyone.